back to Couch Convos, our mental health yap session.
Whoop whoop.
I would like to say thanks for anyone that listened to our last episode. Fun story time. You know when you heard like the little noisemaker at the beginning of the last episode? Only one of us was able to do it, and it was Caroline's. I would like to say that mine didn't work, but I just think it was my lungs that didn't work. So we faked it.
But now the lungs are much better. We are operating at almost 100%.
Yeah. I will say I listened to our last episode back, and I was like, oh, girl. Even like the brain fog she was fogging.
Yeah. I'm glad that you are back to normal human now.
Feeling like a person.
Yeah.
I will say though, like I got really great feedback. I know that you got similar about our last episode, and I think it leads really well into this one too, of when we started this business, and also just like being a therapist in general. I feel like we get a lot of questions about like, what even is therapy? What do you do? Do you just sit there?
Do you just play games?
Do you just play Uno or
Yeah.
Jenga?
Yeah.
Sometimes. We make it therapeutic though.
Yeah. Feelings Uno.
But I do think it brings up this good question of like, how do you actually find a therapist? Because I feel like as a client, it's so hard. And that's part of the reason like why we work so hard to like crank out content and do what we do too.
Yeah, for sure. So, fun question that Sarah curated that I'm excited about. Honestly, when I read this question, I was like, ooh, that's actually really interesting.
Thank you.
So, if therapy were to be a candy, what would it be?
So I immediately thought of a Sour Patch Kid.
First they're sour, then they're sweet.
And then they're not gone because we're not going anywhere. But I thought about how I feel like people think that when you go to therapy, you're just listened to all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like that sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like sometimes it is a bit of a dose of tough love.
Yeah.
And like things you might not want to hear, but you should. So I do think that there are some sour moments, but it's meant for like a sweet cause.
Yeah.
And plus like everyone loves Sour Patch Kids. Like it is a cult classic for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what I thought of, because I do think that like therapy, there's some good stuff and there's some tough stuff that's hard to go through, but
Yeah.
overall like it's for you and it's for your betterment.
I love that.
Okay, what about
Also
you?
because sour candy is great for anxiety.
That it is.
So there you go. Double meaning.
It'll ground you.
Yeah. So mine is, okay, you know those Twizzlers that you pull apart?
I love Twizzlers. Yes.
Me too. Especially the cherry flavored
Are
ones.
you Twizzlers or Red Vines?
I'm a Red Vines girl.
Ugh.
But I love Twizzlers equally as much, but I just think they're different.
They're very different.
But yeah, Red Vines, people say it's like chewing on a red crayon.
Yep.
I love it. I love it. I don't know why.
It's
but
like a good Polly Pocket jacket.
yeah. There you go. Maybe that's what it is. Takes me back to my childhood. It's like chewing on a Polly Pocket.
Yeah.
Well, I prefer the shoes. Get you a better like
Get the heel.
Yeah. So mine would be those pull apart Twizzlers, because you start out with like one concept of who you think that you are,
Sure.
what you think an event is like,
Yeah.
and then we just kind of like slowly peel off the little vine
The
of
layers.
that. Yeah. And then we're just like, let's like process this one and like stick it
Ooh.
in there and eat that little guy. And then we'll move to the next and we'll pull the next little vine. So it's just kind of like working through how you perceive like your life and how you perceive you as a whole. And then you end up just like taking the whole thing. Unless you bite it, then you're a psycho.
Also, like, that's some ways that like people approach therapy. They're like,
I guess it is.
here's everything. Or like the trend where people show up to therapy with a PowerPoint of all their trauma.
That would be me. So I guess
I mean,
I am the biter of the Twizzler, but no.
I have said I have received a PowerPoint before, and it was super helpful.
Yeah.
I also like the human being in me was like, I love seeing pictures of these people,
Oh, me
so I don't have to imagine them in my head.
Yes, I love pictures. There's something on Instagram and it was like, your therapist wants to see the picture of the people you're talking
We
about.
do.
Yes, we do.
Show me your dog. Show me your ex.
Show me all the things.
Show me who you're going on a hinge date with,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. Please.
Please.
But yeah, so that's what I would think. Is like one of the pull apart Twizzlers.
I
just
love that.
processing through.
Sure.
Yeah.
So obviously this podcast is not a substitute for therapy, but we want to encourage everyone that if you haven't tried therapy before, give it a shot. And this episode is going to be all about how to find a therapist, what to expect, and like what even is therapy. Because I feel like, I mean, on a positive note, therapy is becoming very normal to talk about in conversation. But for people who've never been before, it's really intimidating.
Yeah. And confusing.
Even if you've been, like, finding a new therapist too, it's hard.
Even as a therapist, finding a therapist is hard.
Oh, it was so hard for me to find a therapist.
Yeah. It's tough. But okay. So, question number 2.
Yes.
What do you wish that people would know before going into therapy?
I wish people would realize that it's not a magic wand. Because you know what, there are elements of therapy that feel like magic. Like I have a lot of moments with clients where the light bulb goes off, they're having amazing wins, that literally feels like magic, but it's not. They've done that, and like they've done it together. So I do wish that people did understand that like therapy isn't this like magical fix all for everything. I wish it was. I wish that we could wave a wand and everyone's suffering would go away. But sadly, we are not there yet. So I wish people knew that like you get out of it what you put into it. And it's a lot like, I equate it to like workouts and lifestyle. Is if you want to go and exercise for an hour a month, that's fantastic. That's great. Make sure what you're expecting of yourself in return aligns with that. Yeah. I feel like a lot of people expect that if they attend therapy once every 2 weeks, once a week, that they want their whole life to change. It might, but you just have to utilize what you learn in session outside of it to really see a lot of progress. So you get out of it what you put into it.
Yeah. And that your therapist cannot do the work for you. I love that you brought that up. Like, we're going to help you walk through what's going on and come up with like skills, but you have to essentially use those skills when you leave that room. And if not, so we're just going to keep talking about them until it happens. So for me, I think that coming in and it's so hard, and I even saying it, I'm like, it kind of sucks to hear. But like transparency is the biggest thing. Not only for me, like me being a therapist and saying like, I need to be transparent with you, but also like them being transparent with me as well, because this is for them. It's not for me. And like I can sit and I can spout off like so many coping skills, but they're not all going to work for you. And so being able to be open and be like, hey, I tried that for the past 2 months and it's not working. Like I need something else, or can we work through something else? And for me, like even when in my own therapy, like I wouldn't want to tell my therapist like, hey, that didn't work. So like going in and being like, yeah, it was great. Everything's great. I'm totally fine. But then in reality, it's not. Honestly, and nothing's happening.
As a therapist, I tell clients, like, tell me if this wasn't good for you. Tell me if it didn't work. Tell me if you did not like that suggestion. Yeah. Because it's like we're literally catering a treatment plan for somebody. Exactly. We can't help if we don't know.
Right. And also, like, if I say something that you don't understand or that's confusing or that you're just not processing, like, tell me that too. Yeah. Like, I've got to know what's going on.
Right. Like, we do this all day, every day. We can get in the weeds sometimes. And
like, I use the word regulating. Some people don't know what regulating means. Sure. And, like, if you don't know a word that I'm using, like, please be like, hey, Caroline, you got to define that for me. Or, like, let's find another way to process that. So that's my biggest thing is, like, transparency. Not only with, coming in and being open and sharing, but also with letting me know when there's things that are not working or things that are working. Because that's great to get feedback on too.
Oh yeah. I love that. Yeah. So I know that, and I actually saw this online. There are a lot of like popular TikTok videos, Reddit threads about people having horrible experiences in therapy. Yeah. And honestly, like I've seen them and I've read them and it like breaks my heart. But I do think that like that's kind of why we're here. Yeah. And that's why we have this podcast, is to tell people that it's not always like that. And so obviously we are going to be talking about finding a therapist, what to look for, how to really step up for the plate for yourself. But just know that like we sadly can't speak for all therapists. We can only speak for ourselves and what we do here. But if you have been someone that has had a horrible experience with therapy, like we are so sorry. I feel like I can speak for both of us on that one. Like we're so sorry. That's never okay. Therapy should be a safe space. It's not always that. And I think that's why like I honestly loved having this conversation and really chatting through these topics of how to find the perfect and most ideal therapist for you, so it doesn't end up like those stories online.
Right. And I mean, I feel like we've mentioned it time and time again too, of like how there is not one client that's going to come in and I'm going to be like, oh, every single time it's a perfect fit. And they're going to be like, you are the perfect therapist for me. Like everyone that comes through that door, that is totally fine. And that's okay. It's not supposed to be that way. The blank slate therapist, we've talked about that. We're not that.
They exist. They do.
Yeah, they exist. And if that's what you want, then that's great. That's not Find us. One of those. But that is not us. And like, I think, because even the way that we do therapy is very different from each other. Yeah, absolutely. And so like for someone to come in and for them to be like, well, I guess I'll just make do. It's like, no, don't just make do. Like also, there's someone great out there for you.
Fire your therapist.
Yeah.
You can fire your therapist. And that's okay. It's normal.
Yeah.
I completely understand, because as a client, I would probably feel apprehensive before I would say, like, I don't want to work with you anymore. And that's just something I need to work on. But like clients, you can fire your therapist.
Yeah.
Or be like, can we just take a break for a little bit? Because it really is, like, finding a good therapist is like dating.
It's 100% like speed dating.
It really is.
Yeah. And it stinks too, because you'll get in there and you'll have like 4 sessions and you feel like, oh, but I've already divulged all of this.
Right.
But at the same point, they're only going to be able to take you so far. And that could happen too, is you could meet with someone and they can take you to a certain point, and then your therapist should kind of like step in and be like, hey, I'm not sure that I'm what you need anymore. And it has nothing to do with you, but it more has to do with like our skill set and like what we're trained in and what we're best at.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And the thing is, like, that can happen for a client and a therapist. Because I know, like, for me, I have shifted the ages of children that I work with professionally so that they're not the same as the kids in my personal life, because I want to make sure that I have bandwidth for those children. Because I would never want, like, I've worked with like 3-year-olds in the past, but my nephew's 3 now, and I don't see 3-year-olds anymore. And because I would never want to leave a session with a toddler and a 3-year-old, go see my nephew and not have the bandwidth for him. That would just destroy my soul. So if a therapist says, like, hey, I think we need to look for a different referral, I might have to refer you out, just know that it's most likely not you. Yeah. It could be their own stuff. It could just be like they're shifting their expertise, just like people shift their jobs all the time. They might be fine tuning, or they might be getting different trainings and things, and nothing's wrong.
Yeah.
So when you're finding a therapist, I will say, by the time you reach the point where you're like, I want to try therapy, that's incredible. And you're usually in a space where, like, you might not feel great. And, like, we can call that what it is. You might be feeling maybe a little down in the dumps, confused, a whole assortment of feelings. Just remember that, like, it's okay if this is scary, if it feels odd or uncomfortable. Sadly, those feelings are normal, but they are temporary. Yeah. And I think it all starts with, like, defining what you're looking for in a therapist and in therapy itself, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think with therapy, a lot of people come in and think like, oh, I'm going to leave every session being completely happy and feel like I'm quote unquote fixed. And like, fixing is not a thing. You are not broken, so I won't fix you, because that's just not a thing that we do. But like, sometimes you're going to walk out and it's going to suck. Yeah. And you're going to have like,
it's rough.
Tears still streaming down. Hopefully you'll have a therapist who will help you regulate before you leave the space. But like, you might get in your car and you'll be like, wow, that was hard. That was a lot.
Well, I will say, like, in grad school, they gave us the splinter analogy all the time. And it drives me a little bonkers, but like, it's true. Yeah. Therapy is like removing a splinter, where it's uncomfortable if you've got a little piece of wood or like whatever stuck under your skin. Very uncomfortable. Pulling it out of your skin is a little bit worse. And then it feels better. So like you said, like, you might leave therapy feeling like that splinter just came out and it doesn't feel good, but it will.
Yeah. It's just like being a chiropractor. Like, my dad talks about moving bones, and like, you have to move the bones back into place, which that's good. I know. Gross.
So bad visual.
Yeah. But like, it's getting everything aligned so that you'll feel better later, but it's going to hurt with that movement.
It's uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable. Positive change, not so positive change, it is uncomfortable.
Yes, and it takes time.
It does.
That's the biggest thing. Going back to like your magic wand, that there is no magic wand, it takes time. Like, parents, we love you guys. It is not going to, it's going to be more than 2 sessions.
It is going to be more than 2 sessions.
It's going to be more. And that's okay, because then that could just be like a quick fix. It's like a Band-Aid instead of an actual healing. Yeah. So remembering that too, that it takes time. But I feel like I'm going off topic.
No, you're fine. But I think that it helps though, because obviously when we're starting with defining what you want, whether it's qualities in a therapist or like what you want therapy to look like, there are some people who just say, I don't want to tackle the deeper stuff. I want the quick fix. Yeah. Therapy can be for that. You just got to be open with your therapist about that and say, hey, I get it. I know there's a point that I won't be able to grow past. I just want really surface level coping skills to get me through this stage of life, this thing, that thing. That's fine. A therapist can do that. Just know that it won't feel like that, like, earth shattering, world changing revelation that a lot of people talk about.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Or if you're thinking like, you know what, I want to uncover why I'm feeling this way. I want to dig into my past. It might be really hard, and by might be, it will. But it's when you're really thinking about what you want, talk to your therapist about it. Or if you don't know what you want, talk to your therapist so that they know where your head is at. And also, like, you can change things. I talk to clients all the time. I'm like, how much gas is in the tank today? And I'll say, okay, if we are feeling like we're a little bit more diminished today, do we want to look at the top layer of feelings? Do you want to even touch what's under there? Because we don't have to. Or there's some clients who are like, I'm ready. Trauma. Like, great. Buckle in. We're here.
Let's dive in.
Yes.
Let's do this.
So, like, it'll change. And not every therapy session has to be, what did Dr. Stewart in grad school say? Like, the paper shredder of the soul.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. I love that man. He's so sweet. And in that same vein, so, like, one, talking with your therapist about what kind of therapy that you are looking for. But two, like, before you even get into the room of defining like what you want out of that person that you're sitting with. Because especially when you are sitting with trauma and past experiences, like, you want to be with someone who you feel comfortable with. So that might look like someone who is around your same age. They could be a certain gender, certain age, certain race or ethnicity, certain you know, like,
I know, like, regionally, some people want, like, a certain therapist. Like, I know, like, one of my longtime clients liked that I am not Southern. Yeah. I was like, all right, cool.
Sweet.
I'm not very yeehaw. I married someone that's yeehaw, and he's the best. But that's not me. It's not my flavor.
And even, you know, like, religion, spirituality, all of those are very important. So, like, being able to find a therapist that connects with you and what that looks like. And sometimes, you know, you might want someone of the opposite gender. That's totally cool too. It's just whatever is best for you and how you're going to feel most comfortable.
And, like, please don't be afraid to be picky. And I know that sometimes there's this thought of, I'm being too picky. What am I doing? This is your life and your story, and you're being very vulnerable with somebody. Be picky. You deserve it. Like, these are your thoughts and your feelings. And so it's okay if you're going to shop around. Like we said, this is like dating. You might not want to commit your life to the first person you go on a date with. Maybe you do. That's great. You could be happy together. But maybe you do want to, like, shop around. Do that. Like, we really encourage it. I know, at least with us at Soul Haven, we really emphasize that therapeutic fit to make sure that, okay, like, if you're here, we need to be vibing. Like, we need to be a great fit. This needs to be strong. And we want you to feel so safe in this space.
Yeah. Very cool.
I love that. So I know when we're talking about looking for therapists, there are different places to look. But as we look at this, we got to talk about the letters. There's this alphabet.
So many letters. It's just like school and all of the acronyms and such.
So I will say, like, a big picture, and people don't talk about this, is a therapist and a counselor the same thing? Or is there a difference?
Okay, so I actually thought about this a couple of months ago because I kept interchanging them. And for some people, they are interchangeable. They say, like, yes, therapist and a counselor, interchangeable. I have noticed when I say I'm a counselor, people automatically think school counselor.
That they do.
Which I have been. So I can say, well, not right now. But when I say therapist, they think psychotherapy. So I actually Googled it.
Okay. Ooh, I'm interested.
Yes. And Googling, they said that therapy is more long-term psychotherapy, whereas they consider counseling to be more short-term.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which I found interesting because I'm like, we're taught that they're the same thing. Just like a psychotherapist is the same as a therapist is the same as a counselor.
I mean, our
mental health professional
degrees are in counseling, but we are therapists.
Right. So I feel like that means that it's like a personal belief.
I think so too.
So I think they're the same. I think they're interchangeable.
I agree. I think I interchange them myself based on client age, actually, because I do feel like each word is like a different level of safety. Like with kids, I say I'm a counselor because they're familiar with that term. Yeah. They know that they have a school counselor. Maybe their school counselor has popped into their classroom and done lessons with them before. Yeah. Maybe they've lunch with their counselor. So I notice that, like, kids and a lot of times parents feel more comfortable with the idea of counseling, but adults respond better to therapy and therapists because they feel, okay, if I have a therapist that is someone that is credentialed, highly educated in the room, that highly educated therapist is also a very highly educated counselor. Right. But that's okay. I just think it's like different levels of safety. But pop off Google. I like that.
I know, right?
That's a really interesting perspective on it.
Because I feel like a lot of people ask that because we do use them interchangeably.
We do.
And like with kids, I'll call myself a feelings coach. I don't even call myself a counselor. I'm like, you know how like on a sports team and your coach helps you like learn how to hit and do all that? That's how I am for your feelings. Yeah. Because sometimes that can be overwhelming too, especially for a kid.
They think you're the doctor.
Yeah, they do. They think you're a doctor.
No shots here, honey.
Praise the good Lord. So yeah, but go that. Google. I read that and I was very interested with that because I was like, I've never heard that before.
I haven't either.
But people ask me all the time. They're like, are you a therapist or a counselor? I'm like,
both.
What do you mean by that? Like, it's like all of the above.
Can you imagine if you're like, well, what do you mean by that? They're like, reverse psychology.
Are you psychoanalyzing me right now? No, it's like, no, literally, confused. I just don't know what your definition of those are.
So obviously very confusing, and the letters are so confusing. So obviously when we talk about this, it is specific to the state of Georgia. Again, more layers of confusion. So being a therapist is state by state in terms of credentialing, licensing laws, rules, ethics, whatever. That does not pertain to clients. But what is useful is knowing that the therapist's letters after their name will change state by state. So when we talk about it in this instance, it is about Georgia specifically. Yeah. So we really do want to encourage you that if you're outside the state of Georgia, look up the different letters or say like what is the equivalent of an LPC in Florida, in Ohio, whatever that is for them.
Yeah. So let's go with us. Yes. So we are LPCs, which are licensed professional counselors. Yes. We began as APCs, which also are LAPC.
Same thing,
Same thing, LAPCs, which is an associate professional counselor. Yep. We are past that, so we are fully licensed.
Yes.
And essentially, that just means that we talk feelings, but it's different than the other letters, which is, well, then you bring in an MED, which is a Master's of Ed, which you have to have a Master's of Ed in order to become an LPC. And then you have a NBCC, which is National Board Certified Counselor. Yeah. Not all LPCs are NBCCs.
Correct. I think that's actually like phasing out right now. I don't think many people are getting that credential anymore.
No. Do you have yours?
No.
I don't either.
Because it sounds bad. It didn't do anything.
Right. It literally does nothing. Although on like Instagram they put like make sure it's board certified. Maybe that's true for like doctors because in estheticians I've seen a lot with like that. But for us it literally means nothing.
Yeah. So just know that like when you're seeing whether it's an APC or an LPC, an APC is newer to the field. But I will say I have learned more from APCs than LPCs sometimes. So just remember, like, don't cast away APCs if you see them. So like, yes, this clinician might not have as many years in the field, but just remember they have the most current education. Correct. So they've got the most current research, techniques, all of the things. And I love working with APCs and consulting with them. So just know like they're a little bit fresher in the field, which also means they might not be as burnt out.
I was just about to say they just started. So like one, they're very active on staying up with their education. They might want to be a little bit more creative, might have more energy for the counseling space. Whereas, LPCs, we've been doing this a hot minute. And like, though we have to have CEs, so we have to have continuing educations for all the years that we do it. What is it, 35?
Something like that.
Something like that. So we are constantly getting education and like doing the work, but also we get to pick what that is.
And we're not in graduate school. Like I don't have like
teacher,
anymore.
Yeah. So APC's like, people are like, well, I want someone fully licensed, but at the same point, they've done all of the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, if you're looking for like a free and reduced rate, APCs are more likely to offer that because they are provisionally licensed. So just kind of keep that in mind. And like LPCs, so fun fact, less than 50% of counselors make it to their LPC. Most burnout, change careers, they just leave the field for many reasons that we talked about in one of our episodes of like things your therapist friend wished that they knew. So just know that like if you have an LPC, like they're in it, they want to be here, but also just know that you don't know how many years they've been in the field, but they've been there and they're established. Years in the field do not equate to efficiency or efficacy in therapy, but just know like those letters just tell you how long someone has been there for the most part.
Yeah. Then there's an LMFT.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot about that.
Licensed marriage family therapist.
I love a good LMFT. I love the marriage and family therapist.
Yeah. And then what is it? LCSW?
Yeah, LCSW and LMSW or social work.
Yeah. So
and also like just know that all of these different letters, first of all, alphabet soup. It's okay if you're like, wow, I wish there were visuals for this right now. That's okay. All of these different providers have learned how to provide therapy. All of them have. It is all a requirement. So please don't think that if I'm seeing a LPC and they don't know how to work with me. They do, I promise you. Just know that it's in a different lens. So like our background is very clinical. Mm-hmm. We talk about medications. We talk about group therapy. We've learned career counseling, which a lot of people don't realize. It is all about being like a one-on-one therapist for the most part. But then if you work with someone like a social worker, their education is all about having to give you resources and giving you community. And then I feel like you'd be able to speak better on this. What about like an LMFT?
So that does a lot of like family systems. Mm-hmm. So typically you'll see full family groups as well as like couples counseling. Because one of my friends, she is an LMFT and she like feels comfortable doing like full blown like family all in together doing that kind of counseling. Whereas like for me, like I will bring parents in.
Yeah, I won't typically do that.
But that's not like how our session's going to be. Exactly. Is like a full family every single time.
Like if I'm working with a kid, of course we're working with the family unit, but we won't have like every session is with the family the whole time. Yeah. So I will say like just be aware of the letters. And then obviously there's a lot of like PhDs. So there's obviously the Doctor of Philosophy,
PsyD, Doctor of Psychology.
Yep. It's all just different strokes for different folks. But just know that there is no combination of letters that is more or less than the other. Some of it is more student debt than the others. But that doesn't mean anything anymore.
Right.
And especially now the field of counseling and therapy is changing so rapidly. They're working on a compact to make our licenses a little bit more transferable across different states. Yeah. Hopefully that'll happen. And if you're an out-of-state listener, hopefully we can work with you. But for now, just Georgia.
Just Georgia.
For now.
For now.
Yes. So I think that obviously if we're thinking about what you want in therapy, characteristics in a therapist, and then the letters, then it is the idea of, okay, how do I find them? And so obviously there are different places you can look, and we will be talking about using technology and the internet. Yep. So if you start on Google, here's what we have to say about Google. And I really need to like not go on a soapbox, so please like rein me in.
Okay.
Google is a business. Companies will pay to be on the first page of your search results. So please know, and you'll see it. It says like sponsored. A lot of these giant companies pay a lot of money to get on the first page of Google. So when you search therapist near me, I'm sure the first 3 to 5 have paid a very lovely amount of money to get there. They could be great. They could be not so great. So please know that like if you're wanting to use a search engine like Google to look for a therapist, hit the next button. Look through different pages. So yes, it is a little bit of a time commitment, but just know that like Google runs as a business first and foremost. Yeah. They will give you the most convenient information first, which is typically what is paid for. Yeah. So just know that as you're looking.
So like go to the next page. Yes. And with that, it's very fresh on the brain because we literally just had a phone call
with the Googlers,
with the Google people saying like, do you want to join this program? Because you guys are not showing up on the first page. And we're like, no.
Be like, you realize people on the first page paid millions of dollars
it's like
to be there.
we're still building that part of everything. And then SEO and all the things. So then that brings up Psychology Today.
Which I honestly like I recommend people use Psychology Today and not Google all the time.
And I agree with that. Like if you are looking specifically for like a certain modality, which is like a treatment method, or a certain like gender, race, age, all of that, or experience, Psychology Today.
So psychologytoday.com, it is a search engine for therapists. Yeah. And I believe it's nationwide. I
think
don't
so
know
too.
if it's international.
Yeah.
But it is nationwide, and you can literally put in your zip code if you want to use insurance. Like there's filters, just like you're shopping. Essentially, you can put on the filters. Oh, I want a male who takes Cigna, who can work with depression, and who's in my zip code.
Yeah.
So definitely use Psychology Today, and like there are still paid ads on Psychology Today,
Of course.
but you're seeing the person's name, you're seeing their headshot, you get to like see videos of them talking. It's a lot more personal and not just like a landing page on Google.
And they'll have their website on there too. Like
Yes.
if you want to go directly to their website,
Yeah.
it also helps with that like Google search. But I will say, ensure that they are verified.
Yes.
That is something that's super important on Psychology Today, is make sure that they have that little verified check mark, because that means they had to send their credentials
Yes.
and they're not lying.
Please work with a provider who should be there.
Yes.
Because sadly there are some that aren't credentialed, and they brand themselves in different ways, and there's certain language you can use. So I love that you brought that up. So definitely look for that, like verified by Psychology Today. You can also look up their license online.
Yeah.
It's like the Secretary of State in Georgia. You can look up their license if you really want to, and like that's okay. Like we encourage you to do your homework on these people.
Research us.
Yes,
like
do it.
anyone who has nothing to hide, we're totally fine with you checking out like my degree, check out my license, do all the things, because
Absolutely.
this is a big decision.
Again, like this is your story.
Yeah.
This is your, like, it's intimate for sure. Make sure that it's the right person for you.
Yeah.
So I also think that also brings up, if you're reading a lot of these profiles and websites, they all look the same. They really do. It's like, and I feel like I can say that because mine also kind of looks like that. We try to make them different.
Right.
But we're all just feelers. It's like, are you sad? Do you want to not be sad? Have you been through trauma? It's like, they all sound like that. And it's honest, like, it makes me smile because it is very true. So I will say, like, look at if there's a link to a website, you can get a better idea. But if you see someone on Psychology Today, see if they have social media, especially if it's like maybe a younger clinician or a group practice. They might be on Instagram. They might be on Facebook. Like, we're on TikTok now.
Which is wild.
You can get a good idea of a therapist from social media now,
Yeah.
which, like, that wasn't a thing when I found mine.
No.
But I think that it can really accurately show you, like, is this a good match for me? So please do it. I know some people feel weird. They're like, oh, am I okay following my therapist's Instagram? Yeah. If your therapist's professional Instagram.
Yes, professional, not private.
If their professional Instagram is public, that is meant for you. You can get resources. I'm sure that there's entertainment there.
Yeah.
It's there for you. And, like, also it's okay. So definitely give it give it a search, give it a look at, see what you think.
Yeah, it helps with that process too, because then you know, like I had someone say, I wanted to know what the person's voice sounded like before I met with them, and that's important.
Sure.
Is like being able to understand like how they communicate, what they sound like, how they present in a room, and you can see all of that through social media.
You really can. So then also when we think about, it's more alphabet soup. Why do we use so many acronyms?
I don't know. It gets really confusing even for myself.
Yeah. So obviously we're going to think about types of therapy. So first of all, it's okay if you don't know what kind of therapy you want. That's okay. You don't have to.
Yeah.
That is not your job. That is your therapist's job. But some people do come in saying, like, I've heard about this and I love this idea. That is wonderful. That's okay too. And it's another filter from Psychology Today.
Yep.
But if you want to use that filter, we're going to give you kind of a rundown on the most, I would say, popular or maybe the most requested kinds of therapies, and like kind of like a TLDR on what it is.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot, that's another acronym.
That is another
Too
one.
long, didn't read. Shoot, what contraction?
Too long, didn't read.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're gonna start with CBT, but I'm not gonna explain it because, as I told Caroline, if CBT was standing on a cliff, I would push it off. So go ahead, Caroline.
So CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. And essentially with this one, you're going to be challenging a lot of negative thoughts, a lot of negative beliefs, and trying to flip them, switch them. You're going to be doing a lot of like practicing with skills. You're probably going to have homework. So when you
Cognitive triangle.
Yes, how your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors all connect to one another. And this, it works very well with anxiety and depression.
It does.
And if you are to go to a doctor, or if you are to go to a psychiatrist, or if you are to Google, they're all going to say, you need CBT.
Yep.
You need CBT. And of course, like it is interlaced in a lot of the things that we do, just like underlying, but there's some counselors who do primarily that. And it's very solutions focused, meaning like you're going to come in, you're going to say, here's my problem. I want it fixed. And they're going to say, here's your CBT homework. Here's your CBT skills. Fix it.
Yes.
Is essentially what it is.
It's very classic therapy. So typically when you see therapy on like TV or in movies, it's CBT based. And I know that I said I would push it off a cliff, which I would. I will die on that hill. CBT is, like Caroline said, it's the foundation of most therapies. So every single therapist knows how to do cognitive behavioral therapy because that's just like learning your ABCs for spelling and reading. It is that foundational. So just know that like it could be underlying, but it might not be the main focus. So there's also things like DBT. I love DBT.
Dialectic behavioral therapy. I love that one too. Mindfulness.
Love DBT.
Grounding.
Also radical acceptance. Ooh, and like radical genuineness. So I will say it's like, I feel like DBT is like CBT's rebellious cousin.
Yeah, it's like, imagine CBT with no shoes on. Just walking outside.
With a mullet.
Yes, with a mullet. So it's more like connecting with the body.
Yeah, it's like connecting with the body and also making things like more realistic to your life. CBT is very like, here's what's working in research. Find a way to apply it. Do this worksheet. See how it works for you in your life. I feel like DBT takes those principles and applies it to who you are. Because it's like, okay, I know that you like this worksheet. How is that going to work when you're busy? Or what does that mean for you, like when you're dysregulated? How can we ground you if your anxiety is at a 7 out of 10? Things like that. I really enjoy DBT for sure.
Yeah, I do too. I use a lot of DBT. And that's good for like anxiety, depression, borderline personality disorder, PTSD, trauma.
It's great with teenagers.
Self-harm.
Too.
It's great with teens. Teens love it.
That they do. They don't realize they love it, but they do.
So EMDR.
I love EMDR.
That's going to be for Sarah because the only thing that I know about it, and I love it, and I love that people do it, is I know that it's for trauma. I know it's a lot for PTSD, and it involves using your eyeballs and rewiring memories.
I love it because neuroscience is like my favorite pocket of the world.
The nerd of the group.
I love me some neuroscience. It brings me a lot of joy. When we went to Amen Clinic to visit and tour,
she's geeking out,
so excited about all the brain scans.
All the case studies.
So EMDR, obviously eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It is all about rewiring how your brain reacts to trauma, to triggers, and to real life, because obviously research states that your brain changes when it goes through trauma, and we are using neural plasticity, so the ability for our neurons to just adapt and change over time to change our reactions to things. And so it when you explain it, and like when I explain it to clients, it really does seem very off the wall. Like, I'm gonna have your eyes follow this light that's going left and right, and we're gonna talk about our feelings. What?
I know, if that feels like magic.
So it
like
uses
hippy dippy.
Like either a light bar, or some people like pat their lap and things like that. It uses, that's called bilateral stimulation. So it's just having the left and the right sides of your brain engaged at the same time, usually through things like tracking your eyes left to right, using paddles, things like that. It uses that in certain kinds of processing to change how your brain responds to like stressful stimuli, things like that. I will say EMDR is very intense. Most clients, after they finish EMDR sessions, they can have very physical reactions. They might dissociate a little bit. They might get headaches. They might need to take a nap. Those are very normal things. So just know that like if you're wanting EMDR, it's amazing. Just make sure that you're maybe doing it at the end of the day. If you work from home, make sure that like you can be in a safe space, or like even sometimes with very complex trauma, like someone else drives you to therapy, if that is an option for you too.
And you got to get a lot of training for EMDR. So make sure that you are seeing someone who is trained in it, who has done all of the hours, because that is important.
Correct. And there's another, why are therapists like this? Being EMDR trained and being EMDR certified are different now too.
Yes.
So just know that like if you go see an EMDR trained therapist, it could be great. It really could, because the only difference in training versus certifying is paying for a really expensive piece of paper, truthfully, and a bunch of like consult calls. So if you're really worried and it would feel better to have someone that's EMDR certified, absolutely go do that.
Yeah.
Again, it is listed on Psychology Today. You can even put in the filter that you want EMDR, and just kind of ask them if they're comfortable working with someone who has experienced, whether you're wanting to process something like sexual abuse, domestic violence, whatever kind of trauma you want to really process and pick through.
Yeah. Okay, next one. IFS, Internal Family Systems. That one goes to you again because I don't use that very frequently.
So I was really lucky to train in a group practice with a lot of IFS therapists. IFS is really cool. It had a moment on TikTok, which I really loved. It is called Internal Family Systems, and it's all about when we talk about parts work. I think that's a really like hot phrase, especially on social media. People talk about, I want to do parts work. Sometimes when people talk about inner child work, that is actually IFS. So it's all about how we have different parts of us that all serve different jobs. So we might have a protector, we might have a manager, we might have a child in us, and it's all about how those different parts work with each other. So I know I like to do IFS with a lot of clients myself, and when they'll have a reaction and they're like, I don't know why that happened, I'm like, okay, like, was this a child part of you, or was this like, if there's a police officer in you, is it reacting in a certain way, or is this a manager in you? It's a really neat way to kind of compartmentalize and also give space to knowing that like your experiences have maybe created different parts of you, and that's okay. It's not odd.
It's literally the Twizzler candy analogy.
Ooh, I
look
love
at that. Okay, so like maybe I kind of know what it is.
I could see you loving IFS.
I could. I feel like if I actually dug into that I might vibe with that.
You might love it even more than polyvagal,
which is next. Oh my gosh, you guys!
We're
okay,
big polyvagal,
polyvagal. And I have a counselor friend, and she's like the best at this. Shout out to you, Morgan. Maybe we'll have her on sometime.
That'd be great.
To talk
Once
about
we
it.
can figure out the microphone thing.
Once we get a third microphone and stands and such. So polyvagal.
Love it.
It's great for like stress, trauma, anxiety, and like you want to talk about connecting with your body. Polyvagal is the way to go. So essentially it's working off of your autonomic nervous system. With working with your vagus nerve and calming your vagus nerve, because essentially our body goes into fight or flight, it goes into stress response, so it's essentially trying to calm that in order for us to be able to process and change our thoughts, our beliefs, all the things. We just did something on like EFT tapping. We did things on our pressure points.
You did things on EFT tapping. Shout out to Caroline. Go on our Instagram, Soul Haven Counseling, for a very cool script and like walkthrough on EFT tapping.
Yeah,
which is body based.
You want to talk about like feeling like magic?
It feels like magic.
That feels like magic. I'll say that one. Like for me, whenever I start getting headaches, people will see me like, what are you doing? I'm EFT tapping. And people are like, that can't be true. Boom, it's true. Go Google it. But even like Sarah just did a nice little video with the snow and your pressure points and all of that. And so like that is polyvagal, and it's the soul here at Soul Haven. We love it.
We do. That's the holistic side of us.
Yeah. Also
because I feel like, and people will see this, a lot of therapists are very mind-body, which brings us to our last kind of one is somatic-based. So somatic-based therapy is an umbrella term. And so something like polyvagal will fall under it. Somatic just means like senses. Yeah. And it can mean like how your body's feeling. And I feel like for us specifically, like we're very somatic because also we're super eclectic-based therapists. I'll go from one session where I'm doing like flash technique, which is like EMDR's younger sibling that requires much less money to get trained in it. So I'll go from like a flash technique session to like a play-based therapy session to like an art-based or bibliotherapy, and then I'll do things like polyvagal at the end of the day. Yeah. So somatic-based counseling and therapy just encompasses like what you're experiencing real time in your body with your senses. That could be things like yoga, regulating your nervous system. I know that like I've got, by the time this goes up, this post will be live. It's about like mindfulness based movement using exercise. That's somatic based work. So it's all about like releasing feelings and how you're experiencing them in your body.
Yeah. And I want to call out, Sarah just said eclectic therapy, which is what we are. So we are eclectic therapists, which means that we use different theories in order to best fit our client.
Yeah.
So like I am not a full like TFCBT counselor, which would be trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, but for trauma focus. Yes. All the letters. But like instead we bring parts of different theories and techniques that are going to work best for you, which is why it's super important to be open and honest and transparent with your therapist about like what's working and what is not, because we've got a lot of tools in our toolkit and we like to use them.
Yes. And I will say that like if I had a friend looking for a therapist, I would, unless they were wanting to like really like I want to process this trauma, then I would probably recommend that they look for an eclectic therapist. Yeah. Because I know like for us, being eclectic means that we can truly personalize therapy for a client. And that's kind of our whole brand of Soul Haven is highly custom, highly personalized treatment. That is what we like to set as our gold standard. I would hope other therapists do the same. Just kind of look at what everyone else puts out there too, of just kind of thinking about, okay, what do I want? But we highly recommend eclectic based therapist, just because it just says that we can draw from a lot of perspectives to give you exactly what you're looking for.
Right. It's not about us, it's about you.
Correct. So that brings us to what no therapist likes to talk about, and that's insurance.
Money,
insurance. But we have to, because if we're talking about how to find a therapist, that's the first thing people want to know. Are you a network? Are you not a network? So I do think that there are positive and negatives to insurance based not versus not. And I'll really only kind of speak basics for this, because I feel like it's not necessary to really go into the weeds.
Right.
But of course, using insurance is the more feasible option financially. And that is so understandable. So these search engines like Psychology Today, you can filter out who takes your insurance. So please know, like, we have both accepted insurance before, whether it's current, whether it's past. We have both been in that space, and we both know what that is like, why clients get there. It's okay if you want to use insurance. It's okay if you don't. But just know that if you are using insurance, that does not mean your insurance company knows what you're talking about in session. That is such a common fear for clients, and it's understandable. They're like, oh, is my insurance going to know I'm feeling this way or that way? They won't. But what they do require is insurance does require a diagnosis on the first session. Every therapist is different. I know for me, I don't feel completely comfortable or ethical putting in a diagnosis the first session, but I do know with insurance that is necessary. So when I was taking insurance, I would ask clients, hey, have you ever had a mental health diagnosis? Yeah. Did that feel correct? Do you feel like it still applies? And based on the answer, I said, okay, do I have your permission to still use this diagnosis, because it also fits what you're bringing into therapy? Yeah. Or if it doesn't, I'll have to say, hey, I'm required to submit a diagnosis. This is what your symptoms fit. I want to let you know on the front end, and we can talk about it. Right. So how do you handle that?
I do the same thing. Yeah. I've come in and I say like, hey, you're using insurance, correct? And they're like, yes. And I said, okay, well, I want to be totally upfront and like honest with you, is if you are using insurance, I have to give a diagnosis today. And, you know, I do the same thing. I say, have you ever been diagnosed with anything before? And if they say no, then I say, okay, well, from today's session, here's what I am feeling. This can change as time goes on. How do you feel about having that diagnosis on essentially your medical records? And a lot of people are like, well, I don't want that. And I'm like, I understand that. Like, some people, they don't want a diagnosis, and that's totally fine. That's totally okay. Other people are like, I don't care. What does it matter? And then that's like, okay, that's great too. And then that brings up the question of like, who sees that?
And like, will it change like my job options, opportunities?
Yes.
Things like that?
So, no. If you are applying for a job, they cannot get those medical records and know your mental health diagnosis. Your doctors, it's going to be on medical records. But all of us are under HIPAA, so no one else other than us should know those things. But as far as like if you're applying for a job, they're not gonna know that.
Correct. And also, if you're using insurance through your employer will not see your diagnosis. I think that's really helpful. Your employer will see that you're utilizing your benefits, but they won't be able to see that diagnosis. So just know that, I know sometimes that there's fear of like, oh no, I don't want my employer to know that I'm in trauma therapy, or I have a PTSD diagnosis. Absolutely understandable. They don't have access to that. So just know that like that is very safe too.
Or notes.
Yes.
They don't have access to notes either. No. So like after a session, we do have to put notes down to say like what we've talked about. However, it's not sent to insurance. Nope. It's not sent to your workplace. It's not sent to anyone. It stays within our system unless it's subpoenaed by a court.
Yes.
But that rarely happens. And
is there wood we can knock on that's not fake?
Yeah, knock on something. I've never had notes submitted. Yeah. I've never had to be like subpoenaed for that. No, I have gone to court, but which is wild. But so just to be clear, like that all stays very sacred and private into like our care together.
Yes. And so I think that also brings up, you do have options. And so that is one of those, if you still want to use insurance, but you want to go out of network. I know that sounds a little bit, what's it called? Contradictory. There's an option. If you have like an FSA or like a health savings account, so you have like a flex card essentially, you can use that on an out-of-network provider. And I'm an out-of-network provider. Most of my clients use their FSA cards. All that means is they have this health savings account. They have a flexible spending account through their employer, through their benefits. You can use that on a therapist. As just make sure when you're talking to them of saying, like, I understand you're out of network. Do you accept FSA payments? And they'll be able to let you know. And that also means that you're utilizing out-of-network benefits in a way that's still relevant to your health. You can also ask for a super bill if it's an out-of-network provider. It's a glorified receipt. It says the diagnosis on it, but that's all it says.
Yep.
It says when you had therapy, where you had therapy, and the diagnosis. You basically send that receipt to your insurance, and they will potentially reimburse part of the session. I think typically, I don't think I've ever had anyone get a full session reimbursed.
Yeah.
But it's usually a good chunk of the session for sure.
Yeah. Another option, and we at Soul Haven offer this, is it's a sliding scale.
Yep.
So because we know that like insurance is important and not all prices are feasible for every household income. So what we do is we set up a sliding scale that looks like if you are making this annually, it would be this. If you are making this annually, it'll be this. However, at Soul Haven, like, we want to make therapy accessible.
Yeah.
So just like having that conversation of like, what would this look like? I know that we don't take insurance, but there are still so many options that you can have with like places like us. And, you know, if the private practice is wanting to be able to see as many people as they can, they will have those into effect.
Yes. And even if it's not marketed, if you don't see on a website that someone has a sliding fee scale, you can always ask. Yeah. There's no shame in asking. If you want to go out of network for whatever reason, or the provider you would love to see doesn't take your insurance, say, hey, like, do you have a sliding fee scale? Do you have any of those spots available? I know at least for us, like, we will accommodate. Like, we will slide that scale however feels comfortable for you to go to therapy. I know we talked about it, like, we don't want that to be the barrier that gets you in the door. Not every therapist is like that, but just know that option is there. There's also, a lot of folks don't realize it. It's called Open Path Collective. It's a website, and the whole website is a database of therapists who offer either like free pro bono spots or very reduced fee sessions. So Open Path Collective online, again, it's another therapist search engine, and all of those therapists have very highly reduced fees for clients.
Yeah. You got options, people.
You do.
You got options. We're here for you.
That you do. And like, I know for us, like, we're here to help. And if you're still feeling confused, schedule a 15-minute consultation with a therapist who you might like. Because I know for us, if we feel like it's not a good fit, we'll want to make sure that they land with the right person.
Yeah.
So that brings up, like, what is that 15-minute consultation? Sounds kind of odd when you really think about it.
Yeah. It's very quick. And most of the time, it's like you're trying to press to get out. But essentially, it's a time to ask questions and answer questions. So, like, what is therapy going to look like? What is it going to cost? What is this time like? What are your presenting concerns? We're not going to go into the weeds of like what's actually going on in depth specific, but we'll say like, hey, you know, I want to process through trauma. Some therapists will be like, okay, great. What kind of trauma? Let's say it's domestic violence. Okay. Some therapists are like, I am not suited for that. I'm not specialized in that. I'm not trained in that. Let me help refer you to someone who is. Or it's, okay, great. Like, I think that we're a great fit. So it's essentially like speed dating hey, what are your top points? Like, what's going to work best for you? And it gives you a kind of a initial feeling of how they are. Check. Yeah, like it's 15 minutes, so it's quick, but you're gonna hear the tone of voice, kind of their energy, how they communicate, and it could, make you feel a little bit more comfortable going in for that first intake session.
I highly recommend anyone always do a 15-minute consultation, because I like to tell people you're interviewing a therapist and your therapist is interviewing you. It's really making sure that it's the best fit. So I think like definitely expect to get questions like, what's bringing you into therapy? Why now? Do you have any specific goals? Has anything worked or not worked before? Things like that. Those are very standard questions. It's really just making sure that like we really understand what you're looking for and utilize that time. And it's appropriate if you ask a therapist like, hey, are you married? Do you have children? I get those questions all the time. And if a therapist isn't wanting to answer that question, they are trained on how to answer that. So please don't shy away from asking those questions. Because if you're wanting to process something that's happening with your marriage or with things that are very sensitive to you, and you want a therapist either with experience or no experience in it all, it's okay to ask. So it's hard to be open about these things, but definitely try your best. It'll really just help you in the long run.
It is. It's so helpful.
Because obviously after that 15-minute consultation usually leads to your intake session, which is honestly data collection. It's just a lot of background information. But that's the start of your working relationship with each other more than anything.
A lot of questions. You'll be answering a lot of questions. But it's just a part of making sure that you have the whole picture.
It is.
Before you start diving.
I usually honestly apologize before an intake. I always say, hey, like, this is not how sessions typically go. I just have to collect enough background information to get a big picture about who you are and where you've been and where you've come from. And I also tell people, if you don't want to answer this question about your background, it's okay. And especially like trauma, I think that's just us as people and therapists. I'll say, hey, the next is about a trauma history. When I say that, what comes to mind? And I even say, like, you don't have to tell me what these things are. I can just say, like, if you think about trauma in your background, do you think that you might have any? It's like, yes or no. It's like, okay, do you want to elaborate? No? All right.
It's important to give that autonomy, especially with kids. I always start out by saying, do you think I'm in charge or are you in charge? And they always say, well, you're in charge. I said, nope. I said, you're in charge. So we get to talk about what you want to talk about, and we don't talk about what you don't want to talk about. So
absolutely. And just know that, like, if you get to the intake session or you're a few sessions in, it's okay to change your mind. I feel like a lot of clients, especially ones that I like first start working with, and they say, oh, I worked with my old therapist for years and it just wasn't a good fit, but after a long time I was just kind of stuck with it. Like, you're allowed to switch. You're allowed to change your mind. This is about you at the end of the day.
And it might be hard, but in the long run, like, it's going to be better because you're going to build that rapport with that next therapist as well.
Absolutely. It's a great working relationship, but like a lot of relationships, it's okay if you outgrow them. And it's okay if they need a change, take a break, take a pause, whatever that looks like for you. And also know that, like, therapy sometimes, like Caroline have said, and like I've mentioned too, like, it's not always like the super warm and fuzzy. There are days where it's celebrating your wins and it's amazing, and there are days where it does feel like magic, but there are days where it's really hard. But just remember that your therapist is there to remind you that, like, you don't have to go through that tough stuff by yourself. And that's what really helps at the end of the day.
Well,
and that was your crash course on how to find a good therapist.
Welcome to our TED Talk. Thanks for listening.
But it was like, this is hard stuff. It's hard to find a therapist. It's hard to find a good therapist that's right for you. And so if there's ever any questions or concerns or like, where do I start? Feel free to reach out to us. You know, on our website, like, you can schedule a free 15-minute consultation. Obviously, if you're in Georgia, like, we will know a lot more. But if you just have questions, like, schedule a consultation, email us. We are happy to help. This is our job. We know what the word soup is. We know what the alphabet soup is. We're happy to kind of explain or just kind of steer you in whatever direction you want to go
even
in.
if you don't want to work with us, like,
that's fine.
Our goal is to help you find the best therapist for you.
I mean, I'd love to work with you, but like, it's okay if that's not reciprocated.
Right. Like, totally fine. So whatever you need, if you want to work with us, if you want to work with someone else, but you need some questions answered before that, and you've heard us yap about it and you're like, okay, I feel comfortable asking them, we're totally down for that.
Just know that if you're wanting to approach therapy, it's amazing, and that's a lot worth validating and celebrating yourself. So I want to wrap things up and throw out this question. What is your, like, dream therapy space? What does that look like?
Like how it physically looks.
Yes. And like whether it's like technique or like client base, like what is your dream therapy environment? Like what you doing?
I'll have a nice little mix of like art present because I love working with art, love working with my hands. So like if I could do therapy in like a pottery studio, that would be
fun.
So awesome.
Yeah.
And just like throwing paint at things, but then also like stuff. A rage room.
Oh
yes. And we just like hop from all of those. Yes. So like I like to work with my hands a lot. And that's like me in therapy and as a therapist. So that, and then honestly the biggest thing for me with my own therapist and who I am as a therapist is having that space where like I can walk in and I know that no matter what I say, they might show it on their face and they're gonna be real with me, but they're never gonna judge me.
I love that.
Or say like that was wrong or how could you, but instead just be like, okay,
got it,
let's figure that out. Like, what's going on there?
What's next?
You know? Yeah. So definitely hands-on, lots of art. Super creative. But then also just a space where I can literally just go in and let it off.
No animals?
Okay, here's
I'm surprised.
Here's my thing with animals.
You want some farm animals?
Get distracted.
Oh, that's true.
I would get very distracted. Like if I did equine therapy,
I
would just want to be like ripping it with a horse. Like I wouldn't even want to do the therapy session. I'd be like, I just want to ride.
Yeah, you're doing the therapy for yourself.
Yes. So if dogs, cats, farm animals were involved, that would be a lovely day for me.
Goat yoga.
But goat.
I want to try it.
I do want to try goat yoga or puppy yoga. So cute. But I'm not sure that any work would get done.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I respect that.
All right. How about you?
I would the same thing. I think our eclectic therapy is showing. I would want another like mixed use, but I would love for it to include something like a gym and a kitchen.
Oh yeah, you do love the bakes.
Yes, I love to cook and bake and of like a creative space. So like in an art studio. And I love the idea of a gym. I love incorporating movement into therapy. It's something that I could talk all day about. So I would love to do that. But then some kind of like outdoor space too.
Yeah.
Whether it's like some children's hospitals have like labyrinths outside where people can walk and it's very regulating for their nervous system without having to actually think about what's going on in their life. So maybe like a labyrinth or a garden or something like that. No animals though, because same thing. Can't focus.
Can't deal with the cuteness.
I love that. Well, at some point we'll get our ideal.
Yeah.
Plus, like we're already like halfway there.
We have an art room. We can't throw things in the art room currently and break things. We could. We just had a lot to clean up and paint.
And we have air dry clay.
We do have clay.
We do have clay.
So we're working there. We're almost there.
Well, if you ever have any questions about finding the ideal right therapist for you, feel free to hit us up on social media. We are Soul Haven Counseling on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok,
YouTube.
Yeah. Make sure to follow us. If you really want to help us out, subscribe. If you're watching this online on YouTube, please like, comment any questions. Just engage with us anytime you can. And as a reminder, this is not a substitute for therapy. And if you are feeling like you are in crisis, please call 911, go to the nearest emergency room, and get yourself taken care of.
Peace.
We'll see you next time.